Okay. Welcome to Free Minds Summer School. Thank you all for joining. I appreciate it, and hopefully today's webinar will be educational as well as somewhat entertaining and interesting. Topic today is Introduction to SBIR and STTR funding opportunities. In today's webinar, we'll discuss the features of the SBIR and STTR, how they're similar, how they differ from each other. We'll discuss who's eligible to file for an SBIR and STTR. We'll discuss many SBIR and STTR funding opportunities and lots more interesting information about the SBIR STTR universe. My name is Stuart Jacobowitz. I'm Director of Business Development at the Free Mind Group, and I'm delighted to be presenting today's webinar. To learn more about the Free Mind Group, you can visit our website, freemindconsultants.com. It's at the bottom of each slide. And to keep up to date with the latest in non-dilutive funding, you're cordially invited to follow us on Twitter and YouTube, as well as to join our LinkedIn group, Non-Dilutive Funding for Life Sciences. Today is the 8th webinar in Free Mind Summer School series. I hope you were attending the previous 7, but if you missed any of the previous webinars, they're available on our YouTube channel, Free Mind Group. And today's webinar is also being recorded and will also be available on YouTube. In addition, I'll be sending all of you the slide deck from today's webinar, and feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues. After today, we have one more webinar in the summer school series scheduled for next Wednesday, same time as today. And the topic is registration ins and outs, smooth sailing to an error-free submission. Make sure to register early, and please spread the word to anyone who might be interested in these webinars. Information about these webinars, as well as how to register for them, can be found on our website, freemindconsultants.com. At the end of this webinar, we'll have some time for Q&A, where you can enter your questions in the question window on the side of your screen. You're also welcome to call me or email me directly with questions which are specific to your situation or science. My contact information will be available on the last slide of today's presentation. So, today's webinar, as well as this series, is brought to you by the Free Mind Group. Many of you may already know who we are. However, in case you don't yet know us, or if you just want a refresher, let me begin with a brief overview of who we are and what we do. Free Mind Group is a consulting firm. Actually, we're the global leader in non-dilutive funding. Our main objective is to help our clients get as much money as possible from non-dilutive sources. We work across the life sciences, and we focus on the NIH, National Institute of Health, the DoD, Department of Defense, as well as many other government organizations such as BARDA, CDC, FDA, NSF, and more. We also work with private foundations when it's relevant. We have 40 full-time employees, and we've been helping our clients in their quest for non-dilutive funding for almost 15 years. Free Mind files an average of 250 to 300 applications on behalf of our clients every year. That's a great deal of experience, knowledge, and expertise, which is all put to work for our clients in order to increase their chance of winning an award and to help our clients get the largest non-dilutive awards possible. Our clients include academics, research institutes, and university medical centers, as well as companies from small startups of 1 to 2 people to medium-sized and large companies, all the way up to the largest of companies, including many of the large pharmaceutical companies. The Free Mind Group is basically a tool to help you maximize your non-dilutive funding potential. When we start working with a client, the first thing we do is we identify the most relevant funding opportunities. This is a very important step. If you have great science, however, you apply for a grant that's not relevant to your science, or you use the incorrect mechanism, you will not be successful, despite the fact that your science is really deserving of funding. Our analysts then create a list of opportunities, and together with you, they create a strategy, a multi-submission granting strategy. This is done in order to maximize your chance of winning an award. We also manage the complex project production process. We lead a joint application writing process. We can't do this alone. We need you on board in this joint effort since you're the experts in your science. And when relevant, we support final contract negotiations. Okay, so let's move on to the main course, why we all came here today. What is an SBIR and an STTR? So first of all, as you probably all know, SBIR stands for, that's correct, Small Business Innovation Research. And the STTR stands for, correct again, Small Business Technology Transfer. Their mission is to support scientific excellence and technological innovation through the investment of federal research funds in critical American priorities to build a strong national economy. Sounds pretty good, no? Now, among the goals of the SBIR and STTR are to stimulate technological innovation in order to meet federal R&D needs. What they're looking for is the commercialization of innovations. They want to help small businesses participate in the growth and development of the U.S. economy, and they want to help socially and economically disadvantaged small business concerns, or SBCs, as well as women-owned businesses. Let's open our history books for a moment. The SBIR and STTR programs are congressionally mandated set-aside programs which were established under the Small Business Innovation Development Act of, if you guessed 1982, you're correct. And the purpose was to strengthen the role of innovative small businesses in federally funded R&D. Federal agencies with extramural R&D budgets of more than $100 million are required to allocate 2.8% of the budget to SBIR programs every year. By the way, this percentage will increase every year by 0.1% until it reaches 3.2% in 2017. The STTR was established by the Small Business Technology Transfer Act of 1992, 10 years after the SBIR was started, and it was modeled after its older brother, or older sister, the SBIR program. Government agencies with extramural budgets of $1 billion or more are required to reserve 0.4% of the extramural research budget for STTR awards every year. This is going to go up to 0.45% in 2016 and thereafter. Now, these SBIR and STTR programs are only available to domestic small business concerns, or SBCs, and while the SBIR STTR goal is to help small businesses engage in R&D, as I mentioned before, it's specifically looking to fund R&D which has the potential for commercialization. That's a very important goal of these programs, commercialization. In order to be eligible for an SBIR or STTR, the entity applying for the grant must be a for-profit company, and it must have its place of business in the USA. It must also be at least 51% owned and controlled by one or more individuals who are citizens of or permanent resident aliens in the United States, or, and I apologize for the legalese, but hang on, or at least 51% owned and controlled by another for-profit business that is at least 51% owned and controlled by one or more individuals who are citizens of or permanent resident aliens in the United States. Hope that's clear. And it can have no more than 500 employees, including affiliates. Also, VC ownership is not a problem as long as they're United States VCs and there's more than one VC owner. If the company is backed by only one VC, even if it is one US VC, that's a problem. It's also very important to note that all these eligibility requirements must be met at the time of the award, right? Not at the time of the application, at the time of the award. That means, for example, if you now have, say, 470 employees, but by the time the award is granted, you'll have over 500 employees, that will be a problem. Now, while SBIRs and STTRs have some similar goals, as we just saw, their objectives differ in that SBIRs are intended to increase private sector commercialization of innovations derived from federally funded R&D, while STTRs are intended to stimulate a partnership of ideas and technologies between innovative SBCs and nonprofit research institutions through federally funded R&D. So too as far as the requirements. SBIRs and STTRs are similar in many ways. However, they differ in two major ways. First of all is related to the principal investigator, the PI. For an SBIR, the PI must be primarily employed with the SBC at the time of the award and for the duration of the project period unless a waiver is granted by the NIH. Now, when I say primarily employed, it means that the PI must spend more than half of his or her time at this company, or in other words, the PI may not be full-time employee of another organization. On the other hand, for an STTI, primary employment is not stipulated, so the PI may be either from the small business or from the collaborating nonprofit research institution. The second way they differ is regarding a research partner. SBIRs permit and in fact encourage research partnerships, although the company is responsible for at least 67% of the work, and the research institution can complete up to 33% of the work. STTRs, on the other hand, require that SBC formally collaborate with a nonprofit research institution. The small business must perform at least 40% of the work, and the U.S. research institution must perform at least 30% of the work. The remaining 30% of the work may be performed either by the small business or by the collaborating nonprofit research institution or by an additional third party. Since we did mention work, it's also very important to remember that all work must be done in the U.S. of A. The SBIR and STTR programs are available from many government agencies, including the NIH, NSF, DOD, etc. However, today we'll be focusing mostly on the NIH, and we'll also touch a bit on the NSF. The NIH, SBIR, and STTR programs are structured in 3 phases. The objective of Phase 1 is to establish the technical merit, feasibility, and commercial potential of the proposed R&D efforts, and to determine the quality of performance of the small business awardee prior to providing further federal support in Phase 2. As far as funding, SBIR Phase 1 awards and STTR Phase 1 awards are similar in that they normally do not exceed $150,000 total costs. However, with appropriate justification, awards can exceed this by 50% or up to $225,000 of total costs. As far as time period goes, SBIR Phase 1s are for a period of up to 6 months, and STTR Phase 2s are for a period of up to 1 year. A very important point to keep in mind, when we talk about these funding amounts and the cap of $225,000 for Phase 1 awards, you should know that the NIH has received a waiver from the SBA, the Small Business Administration, to exceed this $225,000 hard cap for specific topics. So it's a good idea to read the solicitation carefully and to see the topics where you can exceed the $225,000 hard cap. If your area of science falls under one of the topics where you can exceed this hard cap, you don't want to miss it and leave money on the table. And by the way, when the solicitation uses the terms such as total costs, as it does here, it's important to understand what that means. 2 weeks ago in a webinar on budgets, I discussed the difference between direct costs, indirect costs, and total costs. These are very important terms and concepts to understand when preparing your budget and your application. To learn more about these and other important issues relating to budgets, check out this webinar on the FreeMind Group's YouTube channel or send me an email and I'll send you the link and the slide deck. The objective of Phase 2 is to continue the R&D efforts initiated in Phase 1. Funding is based on the results achieved in Phase 1 and the scientific and technical merit and commercial potential of the project proposed in Phase 2. Only Phase 1 awardees are eligible for a Phase 2 award. However, as you'll see in 3 slides, yes, you can count them, 3 slides, there are exceptions. I'll give you a hint. Stay tuned for Direct to Phase 2 program. SBIR Phase 2 and STTR Phase 2 awards normally do not exceed $1 million total costs for 2 years. However, with appropriate justification from the applicant, Congress will allow awards to exceed these amounts by up to 50% or up to $1.5 million for Phase 2. And remember here once again, the NIH can even exceed this $1.5 million hard cap for specific topics, so make sure to look into that. There's also what's called a second Phase 2 award, whereby agencies may award a second sequential Phase 2 to continue a Phase 2 project. This is not so well known. However, it's not something new. The NIH has been offering this opportunity for several years, and you may recognize it as a Phase 2B award or a competing renewal. And it's usually used as a bridge between Phase 2 and commercialization. The objective of Phase 3, where appropriate, is for the small business to pursue commercialization objectives resulting from the Phase 1 and Phase 2 R&D activities. However, unlike Phase 1 and Phase 2, very important, the SBIR and STTR programs do not fund Phase 3. So don't apply for them for Phase 3 because they do not fund Phase 3. In some federal agencies, Phase 3 may involve follow-on non-SBIR STTR funded R&D or production contracts for products, processes, or services intended for use by the U.S. government. If you're at this stage, it's certainly worth looking into. Another SBIR STTR program is the Fast Track, which incorporates a submission and review process in which both Phase 1 and Phase 2 grant applications are submitted and reviewed together as one application. Because both phases undergo review at the same time, the NIH Fast Track mechanism can reduce or eliminate the funding gap between phases. It's worth pointing out that the NSF, which does have SBIR and STTR programs, does not offer a Fast Track option. When we go over some solicitations in a few minutes, I'll point out which programs offer Fast Track options, so stay tuned. And as I promised you, it's 3 slides later, here's something relatively new. When the U.S. Congress passed the SBIR STTR Reauthorization Act of 2011, one of the changes they made was to allow issuing an SBIR Phase 2 award to SBCs which did not receive a Phase 1 award for that R&D. This direct Phase 2 award is permitted if the SBC has performed the Phase 1 stage type of research through other funding sources. The legislative rationale for permitting the direct to Phase 2 award is to allow an SBC that has already completed Phase 1 type R&D to move directly into a Phase 2 type R&D even if they did not perform the work as part of an SBIR Phase 1 project. Note, this direct to Phase 2 opportunity is only available for SBIRs and is not available for STTRs. Also, it's important to point out that all NIH institutes participate in the direct to Phase 2 except the following 5. The NIDDK, the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Disease, the National Institute of Nursing Research, the NINR, the National Library of Medicine, NLM, the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, NCCAM, and the 5th one that does not participate in direct to Phase 2 is the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, the NIEHS. Something worth mentioning is that we at FreeMind have a 100% success rate on direct to Phase 2. Although I guess I should also mention that the first application deadline was this past April, and we submitted one application and it was awarded. But hey, we're still 1 for 1, and that means we have 100% success in the direct to Phase 2 awards. Standard due dates for SBIRs and STTRs are every 4 months, on the 5th of December, the 5th of April, and the 5th of August. It usually takes around 4 months to get an initial review and another 4 months, or a total of 8 months from the time the application is submitted until you see the money. December 5th is right around the corner, so now's a great time to start working on your SBIR and STTR applications, whether you choose to do it with us or on your own. Now, since there are times that a particular solicitation, as we'll see later, will have non-standard due dates, I once again suggest that you carefully read each solicitation and pay attention to the details of each solicitation. If you don't, you may miss the deadline or other important information. Okay, so we discussed eligibility for SBIRs and STTRs. We talked about the goals. We described their various phases, funding amounts, and due dates. But you still may be wondering, what are my chances of actually winning an SBIR or STTR award? So let's take a couple of minutes to look at a few interesting statistics. Here we can see the success rates for SBIRs and STTRs. We see a sharp drop in SBIR success rates from 2008 through 2011. However, it seems to be improving a little in the last few years. On the other hand, STTRs seem to be somewhat stable in the 20% range. What this tells us is it's not easy to win an SBIR or STTR. There's a lot of tough competition out there. Bottom line, you need top-notch science to win an award. And this graph confirms what I just said. It's not easy to win an SBIR or STTR award. Looking here at SBIR success rates since 1999, we see that there has been a steady decline throughout all phases: Phase 1, Phase 2, and Fast Track. Now, I don't want to brag, well, at least I don't want to brag too much, but I think it's worth noting here FreeMind success rates. For Phase 1 and Fast Track applications, FreeMind success rate is around 25% versus the 13 to 16% average you see here. And our Phase 2 success rate is around 50% versus the 33% average. Just thought it was worth letting you know. We see here that from 2007 to 2013, submissions across all phases increased by about 20%, while awards decreased by about 30%. The lesson here is that it's harder to win an award, but they are still winnable. I think it's also fair to say that it's more important than ever to do everything you can to improve your chance of success. And this includes getting professional help to find the right opportunities, as well as with the entire non-dilutive funding process. Having said that, I certainly don't want you to despair and give up on these great opportunities, so let me share with you some positive numbers. In all three phases, Phase 1, Phase 2, and Fast Track, there's been an increase in the average dollars awarded over the past years. From 2005 to 2011, average dollars awarded in Phase 1 increased 36%. In Phase 2, there was a 25% increase. And for Fast Track applications, there was an increase of 21% in the average dollar award. As the budgets of various agencies increase and the dollars they're required to set aside for SBIRs increase, so too the awards will increase. So don't give up. SBIRs and STTRs are great non-dilutive funding opportunities which are worth pursuing and which should be a key part of every non-dilutive funding campaign. It's interesting to note that out of the $50 billion allocated to funding the life sciences, a major portion of that, around $29 billion or 60%, comes from the NIH. The budget is currently at around $29 billion a year, and a very large portion of this budget, somewhere around $24 billion, is devoted for extramural research, such as research project grants and R&D contracts. Now, although this is an SBIR STTR webinar, keep in mind that while, as I just said, these are great grants to apply for and to win, these are only a small percentage of the funds awarded by the NIH and other government agencies. So don't ignore other mechanisms that are out there. Okay, so now let's look at some of the funding opportunities. And let's start with parent announcements. These are also known as investigator-initiated opportunities or omnibus solicitations or simply unsolicited opportunities. These parent announcements are a very significant part of the NIH's solicitations, and they're also used by other government agencies. As their name suggests, these opportunities are unsolicited, where you, the investigator, pitch your ideas to the program officers. It's very important to note that roughly 70% of all awards across the NIH are unsolicited, right? 70%, 7-0. So if you can't find any solicitations which exactly fit your science, you can always go the omnibus route. So let's start off looking at some omnibus solicitations, or as I like to say, let's take a ride on the omnibus. Here we see two SBIR omnibus solicitations where applications are accepted for Phase 1, Phase 2, and Fast Track. The first omnibus solicitation, PA 14-072, is an STTR parent announcement from the NIH. Most NIH institutes participate in this parent announcement, which is standard funding and due dates. Next deadline is December 5th. Notice that in the second omnibus solicitation, PA 14-071, joining the NIH are the CDC, the FDA, and the ACF, the Administration for Children and Families. Here, too, most NIH institutes participate. Funding is standard, and standard application due dates apply. Next deadline, December 5th, so make sure not to miss that. Now, for both parent announcements, Phase 1 is aimed at establishing the technical scientific merit and feasibility of the proposed R&D efforts. For the Fast Track application, you submit both the Phase 1 and Phase 2 application concurrently. The Phase 1 portion of the Fast Track must specify clear, measurable goals or milestones that should be achieved prior to initiating Phase 2 work. If awarded, the Phase 2 portion may not be funded until a Phase 1 final report has been received and assessed by program staff that the Phase 1 milestones have been successfully achieved. Here we have a direct to Phase 2 SBIR parent announcement, right? That's the new one that we have a 100% success rate. And this is to support biomedical technology development. Here again, most NIH institutes participate. And the scope of this funding opportunity, or FOA, funding opportunity announcement, is to encourage applications to the newly authorized direct to Phase 2 SBIR grant mechanism. Quite broad. Standard funding and due dates apply. Next deadline again, December 5th, followed by April and August. Standard dates. Here we see an NSF SBIR Phase 1 solicitation. NSF 14-603 by the Directorate for Engineering, Industrial Innovation, and Partnerships. The R&D should be based on innovative, transformational technology with potential for great commercial and/or societal benefits. The program invites proposals from small businesses across a broad range of science and engineering disciplines. If successful, you'll receive a grant of up to $150,000 for a 6-month development feasibility project, and you can then compete for a second grant of up to $750,000 over a 2-year period with the aim of advancing the technology toward commercial deployment. Indirect costs plus fringe benefits are limited to a maximum rate of 150% of direct salaries and wages. This solicitation asks for information about your track record of commercialization. However, they encourage proposals from new as well as seasoned entrepreneurs. What's most important is that you have a transformative idea or innovation and that your team's primary goal is the commercialization of the technology. Now, as I said, this is a very broad solicitation. However, there are certain selected topics that NSF is looking to fund, including advanced materials and instrumentation, biological technologies, smart health, and biomedical technologies. Now, for a complete 34-page list of topics, see the NSF website link, which you see at the bottom of this slide. Don't worry, I'll send you the slide deck so you'll have the link there also. Note the deadline for this is December 2nd, not like the others, December 5th. This is December 2nd, and by the way, you cannot hand it in if you want to hand it in early. You cannot hand it in before November 2nd. Oh, and by the way, 3-month success rate with NSF SBIRs is 60%. Not quite 100%, but 60%, not too shabby. Now, although we've talked a lot about the NIH, since we just discussed the NSF SBIR Phase 1 solicitation on the previous slide, let's take a moment to look at the NSF SBIR program. You can see here that the NSF has set aside monies for 200 SBIR Phase 1 awards and almost 50 STTR awards in fiscal year 2014. You can still get in on this game with the next deadline in December. Funding is pretty good, and their success rates are not bad either, although 3-month success rates are higher than the ones posted here for the NSF. Also notice the NSF does not offer a fast-track option. Here we see a joint NIH and CDC SBIR contract proposal, right? Not a grant, this is a contract proposal. Participants include the NCI, NHLBI, NIAID, and the NIDA, all from the NIH, as well as centers from the CDC, which deal with global health, chronic disease prevention, infectious disease, HIV and AIDS, hepatitis, STDs, and immunization and respiratory disease. This covers a lot of ground. It's worth looking at to see if your science is included here in any of the fields this contract proposal is looking to fund. Worth noting is its irregular due date, November 5th, even sooner than the standard December 5th due dates we've been seeing before. This is a contract as opposed to a grant, so let me take this opportunity to point out some of the differences between the two. While grants are often investigator-defined, contractors are always defined by the NIH. With grants, you may contact the program officer if you have any questions, but with contracts, you must contact the contracting officer. Omnibus grants are received 3 times a year, while contracts are only received once a year. Grants undergo a peer review and the score determines the award, while with contracts, if a proposal scores well during a peer review, the final deliverables must then be negotiated. A grant requires a final report after Phase 1 and an annual report during Phase 2, while contracts require either monthly or quarterly reports. And finally, grants typically do not have set-aside funds while contracts do. That means that even if you don't have the most amazing science, if you're the only one to submit a contract application, there's a chance that you may still win the contract. Now, there are many solicitations across the broad range of sciences. If you go to the NIH website today and do a search for SBIR and STTR, you'll find 75 open solicitations. And here we have a few examples. The NIMH, the National Institute of Mental Health, has a solicitation, Complex Technologies in Therapeutic Development for Mental Health Research and Practice. The NIDDK, National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive and Kidney Disease, has a solicitation, Lead Optimization and Preclinical Development of Therapeutic Candidates for Diseases of Interest to the NIDDK. Now notice listed here twice, one of them is for an SBIR and one is for an STTR. The National Institute of the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, and the NICHD, has an open solicitation for development of appropriate pediatric formulations and pediatric drug delivery systems. And the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, is looking for innovative molecular analysis technology development for cancer research and clinical care. And there's a funding opportunity announcement from the NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which is looking to fund SBCs that are working on the development of opioid adjuvant fixed combination dosage forms for the treatment of chronic pain with reduced addiction potential. And even a few more examples. Here we have a solicitation from the NINDS, the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. It's for clinical trials. Specifically, the NIH StrokeNet Small Business Innovation Clinical Trials and Biomarker Studies for Stroke Treatment, Recovery, and Prevention. This actually was also mentioned in a recent CNS webinar I gave a few weeks ago, and that's also available on YouTube. And finally, last one I'll mention here for now is a Phase 2 SBIR from the NIAID, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, looking to fund clinical trials with the NIAID SBIR Phase 2 Clinical Trial Implementation Cooperative Agreement. As I mentioned, these are only a few of the SBIR STTR solicitations out there, and you see how they cover a very broad range of science and diseases. All these solicitations, which I just mentioned in the last 3 slides, have standard funding. However, while most have their next deadline on December 5th, there are exceptions. For example, the one I mentioned from the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, has a November 4th deadline, and the NIAID solicitation has its next deadline January 13th. So once again, read carefully, read the solicitations, and know when to file so you don't miss the deadlines. As I said before, SBIRs and STTRs are not easy to get. Actually, none of the government grants are easy. The government grant programs are not like an ATM, where you walk up, push a few buttons, and get your money. Each has its requirements and challenges. SBIRs and STTRs have some inherent challenges. As I mentioned earlier, for SBIRs in Phase 1, the company is responsible for at least 67% of the work, and the research institution can complete up to 33% of the work. In Phase 2, the company is responsible for at least 50% of the work. And for STTRs, the small business must perform at least 40% of the work, the U.S. Research Institute must perform at least 30% of work, and the remaining 30% could be performed either by the small business, the research institution, or an additional third party. So the challenge here is if you're a virtual company, you have to figure out how to deal with this. Also, milestones. One of the goals of SBIR and STTR programs is commercialization of innovations. These programs are very interested in product development. Therefore, showing milestones and meeting them is very important. There are several atypical or uncommon sections that must be submitted with the application. In a Phase 2 proposal, for example, you must submit a 10-page commercialization plan. There are numerous items that must be addressed when assembling this document, and the language used should be more businesslike and less scientific. This should convey the company's ability to commercialize the product both from a managerial perspective as well as economic viability. The consortium is also a vital part of the application when percent effort in-house versus work outsourced is questionable. Also, to ensure that all aspects of your application are covered from an expertise perspective, it's sometimes wise to implement a plan for multi-PIs. And finally, it's important to make sure that the application you submit is a consolidated, coherent application that is responsive to the solicitation's requirements and guidelines. Now, once you've submitted your grant application, what happens? So let's take a moment to look at the NIH review process, which, by the way, is fairly similar to the review process in the NSF, DOD, and other places as well. What they're basically doing when they're reviewing, considering whether to fund your application, is they weigh the strengths versus the risks. The way they do this is by first looking at two things: responsiveness and competitiveness. Are you responsive to the solicitation? Because no matter how good your science is, if you're not responsive to the solicitation, you will not be awarded. And are you competitive? When we talk about competitiveness, they mainly look at 5 criteria, and they score you on these 5 criteria. The significance of your research to public health. Is it significant? How significant is it? Is it innovative? Are you really going to make a change with your approach? Leadership. Do you have the right leadership in place? Does the PI and the key personnel have the expertise and experience to successfully lead such a project? They look at the environment. Can it support the work you propose? For example, do you have the proper lab space for the work you're going to do? But ultimately, what makes the difference between a good application that is not awarded and one that is awarded is your scientific approach. The milestones, the specific goals. Ultimately, top-notch science wins awards. SBIRs and STTRs are great mechanisms and considered by many as a gateway to larger awards. In order to increase your chance of success, we suggest submitting no less than 3 to 6 SBIRs and STTRs every year. For some reason, and usually for the wrong reasons, despite being eligible and responsive for additional non-dilutive funding opportunities such as R01s, R21s, UO1s, or more, companies who've been successful with SBIR or STTR grants are oftentimes hesitant to apply for these other opportunities. To really take advantage of non-dilutive funding as a strategic source of funding, we suggest that companies submit SBIRs and STTR applications every cycle, as we said, at least 3 to 6 a year, in addition to other proposals with various other mechanisms, thus maximizing your non-dilutive funding potential. Now, for a more broad perspective, I'd like to take a step back and give you an idea of our approach to non-dilutive funding and how to maximize your chances for an award. First of all, you need to know the interests of the institute. What's on their agenda? What are they looking to fund? What will not get funded because it's not within scope or was within scope in previous years but isn't now. If necessary, communicate with the program officer. This is extremely important and valuable. You need to focus your project application. Focused applications have a higher chance of being favorably reviewed. Remember, the NIH does not fund companies or labs. They fund projects. You do not want your proposal to come across to reviewers as overly ambitious or unrealistic. Make sure to ask for what's necessary. Don't inflate the budget or ask for too little. Having an accurate budget shows that you're realistic and understand your project. Make sure to present a complete project. Have one comprehensive storyline. And leverage on research collaborations. Whether or not the mechanism requires it, or in a case where there's a gap in your capabilities, it's important to collaborate. Take on consultants, statisticians, or outsource work you're less proficient at or don't have the expertise to complete. In an effort to maximize your chance to win an award and to win the largest award possible, I don't think I can overestimate the importance of targeting the right mechanism. As you saw in the various solicitations I showed, there are many solicitations and many different mechanisms. While we focus today on SBIRs and STTRs, you all know from past webinars that there are plenty others, R01s, R21s, U01s, all sorts of cooperative agreements, and many, many more. It's very important to know your way around these mechanisms as they represent more than just letters and numbers. They represent the requirements of the solicitation, the nature of the project, budgetary factors, cooperation with the NIH, and more. There are many different pockets of money, and you really need to target what's right for your project. It's vital to understand the different size of award and success rates, know the different funding levels, and match them to your requirements and needs. And of course, conduct a thorough strategic assessment. What are your objectives? What research do you have, and in what stages of development are they? Where would you like your research to be in the next 12 to 24 months? What is the potential for success for each research project? And all this should be done with the goal of creating a multi-submission granting strategy. The more shots on goal or at-bats, your choice of sport, the better your chance for success. I'd like to conclude with a little bit about the Freemind professional team. We currently have 40 full-time employees, including scientific analysts and grant consultants, who are dedicated to providing clients with the best strategy for targeting non-dilutive funding opportunities, as well as the best execution of these strategies. All analysts and managers have a great deal of experience and expertise, which is channeled into your application in order that it's the most complete, best written, and highest quality application that can be submitted. And on a personal level, they're all really nice people, which makes working together with them efficient, effective, and enjoyable. I'd also like to take this opportunity to personally thank Dr. Sigal Katz, one of our senior analysts, for assistance in preparing this webinar. I learned a great deal from her, and it was a real pleasure to work with her. I'm sure that any of you who get to work with Dr. Katz will also find her to be extremely knowledgeable, professional, and very pleasant to work with. To summarize what we do, we offer two core services. First, we conduct a strategic assessment. Our analysts begin by understanding your specific science, where you are now, and where you'd like to be in the next 12 to 24 months. Then, based on a series of conference calls as well as information you supply us with, our analysts come up with a list of opportunities which is used to create the multi-submission granting strategy. Remember, specific solicitations typically account for only around 30% of the awards. The remaining 70% are unsolicited or investigator-initiated. In order to properly file for one of these omnibus or unsolicited awards, our analysts engage program officers to get their feedback. A lot can be learned by speaking with the POs as to how best to focus the application, and this also improves your chance for success. The strategic assessment is an ongoing process. Funding opportunities present themselves literally every day, and when an opportunity emerges that meets your requirements, we'll present it to you and see how best to incorporate it into the strategic plan. Once we have this multi-submission granting strategy in place, the grant consultants join the picture to manage the grant writing process. This is a joint effort. We can't do it without you. We manage the process, we create comprehensive templates based on solicitation guidelines, and fill in as much information as we can, but it's your science and you know it best. This ongoing feedback process, or ping-pong process, back and forth between us, with you answering questions, filling in missing information, and us converging the information, writing and rewriting parts, organizing budgets, etc., is what goes into filing the highest quality application with the best chances for success. And here we see a schematic view of the process and the joint effort. You start with your R&D funding needs, then based on that we create a multi-submission granting strategy. First with a long-term view, and then focusing in on the short term. We then get into the grant writing and application submission phase, followed by review and hopefully funding. And the process continues with more funding opportunities, more applications, more awards, and on and on and on. And with that, we've come to the end of today's webinar. I thank you very much for attending. I hope you found it interesting and educational. If you have any questions on the subject or what was discussed today, I'm happy to answer them now. Well, we'll see as much time we have. Looks like we have a little bit of time, so I'm happy to answer as many questions as time allows. If you have questions about a specific project or science, I'd be happy to answer them as well. However, I think it would be better to answer them one-on-one. So please email me your questions. You see my email address here, as well as my phone number. And let's arrange a time to speak. If I don't get to answer your questions today, please feel free to contact me directly. Okay, let's see if we have any questions. Okay, so we have a question. Someone asked if this is being recorded. Yes, it is. It will be available on YouTube. I will send out the slide deck as well as a link to the recording on YouTube. What is your typical fee structure? Okay, so we work on a success-oriented basis. What that means is if you win an award, we get a success fee. Typically, it's calculated as about 6% of the award. In addition, because there's so much work involved in preparing this, we also charge a monthly retainer fee. We usually work on an 8-month minimum period of time. 8 months gives us, enables us to meet at least 2 major NIH deadlines, as well as many other deadlines in between. And we charge, as I said, a monthly retainer fee. The fee varies depending on how many projects you have going and your pipeline, so that I'm happy to discuss with you on a personal basis. But something you should know is that with this retainer fee, we file an unlimited number of applications for you. If during those 8 months you find 2 that are appropriate and applicable, that's what we'll file. If you find 5, 10, whatever it is, that's what we do, and there's no extra charge for that, no extra charge on our retainer. But again, to get into the specifics, give me a call, send me an email, we can talk and understand your personal situation, and we'll discuss pricing. Someone asked if there's a special category for cardiac-specific projects from the SBIR STTR. Well, there's the NHLBI, National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, which has many different opportunities, and I don't think they're one of the excluded ones, but we could certainly look at that. That's easy enough to look up on the website. If you want to email me afterwards, I can get you a more accurate answer. And someone's asking for a link to webinars in this series. So you can either go to our website, freemindconsultants.com, There's a tab on the top for learning, and you see there a link for all the webinars, or you can go into YouTube and search FreeMind Group, and you'll see there in our FreeMind Group channel all of our webinars are listed. Okay, there's a question here on eligibility. Just to clarify, yes, you need to be a for-profit company, right? If a not-for-profit entity is not eligible, you have to be in the U.S. There are some ways around that. I mean, not really some ways around that, but it's best if you're not sure to ask, either to ask us specifically, or you can go to the NIH and ask them. And then, yes, it has to be at least 51% owned or controlled by a U.S. citizen or permanent resident alien of the United States, and has to have no more than 500 employees. I have a question unrelated to this: if a company can apply for an R01 grant. And yes, the question is definitely yes. We have applied for companies for R01s, and they have been awarded R01s. So yes, that's definitely possible. You can contact me directly about that. You can also check out, we have a webinar given a few weeks ago on R01s where you can listen in, and there you'll see a lot of statistics about R01s for companies that have been successful. Okay, so I believe we're out of time here. So I apologize if I did not get to your question, but again, contact me directly. Best is by email, stewart@freemindconsultants.com, or you could leave a message or try to call me or leave a message on my voicemail, and I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. In closing, I just want to let you know that we've looked at some of your websites, and we looked at the companies and people who registered, and some of you have some very interesting science, which we think has great potential. So I hope to be calling you in the next few days, week or so, and I look forward to speaking to you and seeing how we can help you with your non-dilutive funding needs. Like I said, the webinar is available on YouTube, and you should be receiving the slide deck within the next day. Finally, please make sure to register for next week's webinar, the last in the series, Registration Ins and Outs, Smooth Sailing to an Error-Free Submission. And with that, we conclude today's webinar. I wish you a good day or a good evening, depending on where you are. And we look forward to being in touch with you soon. Thank you, and be well.